Well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. This is, it's great to be here with you, and let's get started. So, how about the next slide, Linda? Let's take a look. That is the oldest relative that we have an image for. That's actually Baruch's father. All right? Don't know much about him, but what can you say? There he is. Next slide, please, Linda. Okay. Yes.
Do you mind reading this one?
Oh, I'll be glad to. Yeah. Okay, this next slide, this is Baruch Schleisinger Weil, and this is his, I believe it's a photo taken in a studio, and it's the photo you see the most often. We have very few photos of him, so we're going to be repeating this, and I think he's probably around 60, 65, still a young man, I would say. And, but this is what he looks like, and let's take a next slide. Okay. Now, this is only going to be up here for a minute. I know not everybody loves maps, but I wanted to be able to explain to you briefly why it is the name is pronounced Weil as opposed to Weil, because, you know, it's a common misunderstanding. The reason is you can see the boundary made by the Rhine River that flows between France on the left and the Germany and Switzerland on the right. It's simple. If you're born on the French side, you have the French pronunciation, which is Weil, or V. If you're born on the other side, it's the German pronunciation, which is Weil or Weil. So, enough of that. Let's move along. But you can see Strasbourg and Alsace, where the family was from. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the oldest document that we have. This was a child of Moses and Celestine Lavergeois Weil. They had several children. All we know about this one, this is Eugene Weil, or Eugene V. And he was born in 1832. When they came to the United States, 15 years later, 10, 15 years later, he was not with them. So we believe that he died as a child or as an infant. However, the name Eugene Weil is one that has been carried through successive generations. So, next slide, please. Okay, in some of the history that was written 20, 30, 40 years ago, Moses Weil, they say Moses Weil was a rabbi. And I put this up here to show you how sometimes history can go a little wrong. It's written that he was a rabbi in France, and he came here. There was a rabbi, Moses Weil. That wasn't our Moses Weil. So, next slide, please. Can we back up just a second? Linda, can you do that? Back up to, yes, thank you. No, I'm sorry, that's right. This is how this came about. This is in a shadow box, and there's a plaque on it that says Rabbi Moses Weil. Well, when my grandmother, Celeste Weil Simon, passed away 60 years ago, 50, 60 years ago, my Aunt Marion and her daughters were going through looking for cleaning out the house, cleaning out the cupboards, and they found this cameo in it. And lovely people, Mary and Kathy and Tony, but they were never opposed to kind of enhancing things a little bit. And they said, oh, who do you think this is? Do you think that could be Moses Weil? Oh, yes. So they had to put in a shadow box, and they had a plaque made that says Rabbi Moses Weil. I don't know if it could be, but that's not the one who left Strasbourg and left Alsace-Lorraine to come to the United States in the 1840s. Next slide, please. This is Moses Weil. This is the Moses Weil who came to the United States. He came from Alsace, which is one of the easternmost provinces of France. He came with his wife. Well, next slide, please. Oh, there it is. This is his wife, Celestine Lavergeois Weil. Now, what we know about, we believe that Celestine, in fact, was Catholic, while Moses and Baruch and much of the family back then were and many of us still are Jewish. But next slide, please. Oh, let's go not quite that fast. I'm sorry. Go back to Celestine. Let me share with you what we know about Moses. Moses and Celestine and their family were one of the very first Jewish families to arrive in Milwaukee about 1844, 1845. And they pretty quickly made their way out here. We don't know why they came out here. Probably they heard it was good opportunities out here. Moses built the first, what we would call a general store in West Bend. It was the first they had. It was the first frame retail shop. It came out. And what I'd like to do, if I could shuffle through here just a little bit, if I can find it quickly. Well, I'm not going to try and do that right now. But when he came out here, they opened a store, and it was known as the store they put up. It was called the Sharp Cornered Building. And it was downtown, and in the history books, they talk about how it became a popular place for farmers and people to gather, especially on market day. We don't know for certain where this building was. I was in Washington County Planning Department last week looking at the original plat maps. Things have moved around a bit. But I believe that the location of this first general store in West Bend, next slide please, was here. You know that sign? Yes, if you go to Farmers Market in West Bend, which is at a triangle point of land, it's called Old Settlers Triangle. And right there it says how it's the center of business, social, and political life here in West Bend. So I think there's a reasonable chance that that is where the store was. So he was involved, he actually, there's a book called The History of Washington and Ozaukee Counties. It was written, published in the 1880s. You don't have to look far for it. It's a Google book. You can just Google History of Washington and Ozaukee Counties, and you can put any name in you want, and you will do a search. What I found when I did that was how people had really good things to say about Moses and his family. That he was an excellent person, a pillar of the community, lots of really nice things to say about him. Now, he and Celestine had several children, one of whom married Baruch Schleisinger. So let's move along here. There he is again. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay. Now this is Eliza Adele Weil, as it says. She was, well, let me say that both of these gentlemen and their families first came to New York, then they went to New Orleans. And they went to New Orleans by way of, I'm not sure how they got there. I know they stopped in Baltimore, and I'll explain why I know that in a minute or two. But they made their way down to New Orleans, and there still was a Weil family in New Orleans. And then they came back they came up here as the place they decided to settle, had the most opportunity, I suppose. Now, this is a family story, but it's not a legend. By all reports, it's absolutely true. Baruch came here. He was about 40 when he arrived in the United States. He left France in 1843. He got to Wisconsin about 1845. He traveled with his son, Julius, who was 18 years old at the time. They met the Weil family, perhaps in New Orleans, perhaps they met here. We're not sure about that. Julius courted, at least a little bit, the daughter of Moses and Celestine. She was 18 or 19, right age for Julius, but reportedly this is true. She fell in love with Julius's father, Baruch, who was about 41 or 42 when they got married. And by all reports, it was a happy marriage. They had a bunch of kids. But yes, I do wonder about that. But I have to say this is a pattern that has not been repeated in the family since then, okay? Okay. Okay. So next slide. Well, before we get to this, let's go back one more. Let's go back to the picture of Baruch while I tell you a little bit about his career when he got here. That's good. All right. He got here, like I say, about 1845, and he got involved in civic life and in politics, and we're not sure exactly how that came about, but he was, by 1847, 1848, he was well known in Madison. And we know this because by that point he had married married his wife, his second wife. He had been married in France, and he, according to Baruch, he divorced his wife, who he had some very nasty things to say about her, and he and his son came to the United States. So he marries. By the way, he was he was younger than Moses Weil, I will say this. Not a lot younger, 5-10 years, but nevertheless, there is that age difference, which is hard to get your mind around. But nevertheless, so he got involved, and people wondered, why did he leave France, and why did he do what I'm about to say he did? What he did was, once he was married, he went to it wasn't the state government, it was the territory. It was the territorial legislature of Wisconsin, and he got a bill passed, Bill number 50, which allowed him to add her name to the back of his, not hyphenated. He became Baruch Schleisinger Weil. And we'll get into the reason he said that in a minute or two. So 1840, by the time statehood was declared in Wisconsin, he'd already gotten a bill passed to his benefit, and he, along with his father-in-law and his family here in West Bend, started buying up land, and they bought up a lot of land. At one point, Linda, maybe you know how many, I don't have the figure, but do you know how many acres they bought pretty quickly while it was still a territory?
I don't want to misspeak, but it was thousands of acres.
In the thousands of acres, that's right. And in fact, there are, if you look at plat maps from the 1850s, 1860s, 1880s, you see, especially around Big Cedar and somewhat on Little Cedar, they owned a lot of the property around there. At least in the hundreds and hundreds of acres of shoreline. Now, and I want to say, so far as I can tell, they flipped it as fast as they could. There was a lot. It was a boom market. They bought it, they mortgaged it, they flipped it, and they moved on. They did a lot of that. Baruch, though, he also, the official date is 1869, but by about 1848, 1850, he had platted out the village of the town he named. What did he name it, folks? Schleisingerville, that's right. Which was a mouthful even then, okay? So he had plotted that out, and he was involved, as I say, he got elected in 1852, I believe. Jim, does that sound right? Okay, thank you. This is our family table over here right now. By the way, I'm not the only family historian in the family. This is my cousin Jim Feldman over there. Jim is professor of environmental studies and history at UW-Oshkosh, and is a graduate, got his doctorate at Madison at their famous history program. Thank you. Okay. Other people who have also been just as interested as I have, and what I'm telling you is not just things I've found on my own. I've done a lot of research on my own. Jim and I have spent a lot of time, or several days, climbing through the old records at the Historical Society in Madison. Our cousin Jeff Mann, some of you are sailors, may remember Jeff. His dad was Jim Mann, who was a Commodore at the Yacht Club. He's done a lot of research. My daughter Maggie, I have two daughters, my younger daughter Maggie also has done a lot of online genealogical research, as has my wife Jan. So, moving along though, he was involved in politics, and he got elected to the state assembly about 1852, then he got elected to the state senate for several consecutive terms. this is an interesting document, and I want to say, Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes, all right? Now, I want to say right now, I'm going to tell you about this document. We saw this document. It had been hanging in first the Weil Cottage and in the Simon House on Big Cedar since my dad was a little kid. He told me he could remember when that seal was red, but it faded from the sun. And we knew what it says, because you probably can't read it, but Baruch was given a commission as a brigadier general in the state militia. And we said, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, he was in the state militia too, besides government. And then about 15, 20 years ago, I read an article in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that said there was more to it than that, okay? Let me ask you all, I hesitate to do this, but we live in interesting political times, let's say, and there's different opinions about this, but let's just imagine we're talking about, which it was, this was really the frontier in the 1850s. The frontier stopped, the frontier met the United States pretty much at Portage, Wisconsin. A famous historian was born and grew up there, Frederick Jackson Turner. And his field was the significance of the frontier, and that's because he saw it. He saw the train arrive in Portage. He saw the mountain men. He saw the people coming from the Rockies and stuff to trade. It was happening right there. So this is not contemporary times, but this is what happened. William A. Barstow was the governor of Wisconsin. He was the third governor of Wisconsin, and he was elected. Things went well. He ran for re-election against a man named Coles Bashford. Can we move ahead just so you get a quick look at these people? He's the sitting governor, and he's up for re-election, and he runs against Coles Bashford. Okay? Now let's back up to this, to the brigadier general thing. Okay. What it says the date that he was, this is what I learned. Forget what the date says. Coles Bashford, it was a very close election. It was decided by 147 votes on the first vote. Bashford said he won. Barstow said no, he won. The Supreme Court said Bashford won. Barstow said no, I won. And it was getting pretty hot in Madison. This all transpired within a few weeks. Barstow, this is what I learned. This is the truth. This is history. He mailed these things out to a bunch of his supporters. He made them officers in the state militia, and he asked them to come to Madison. Remember, history sometimes rhymes. Keep that in mind. He had them come to Madison. Now, I don't know whether Baruch went to Madison or not. This is dated also February 29th. It's a leap year thing. And by the time he got this, or shortly thereafter, both houses of the state legislature, because there's a recount done, and there was no question that Coles Bashford was elected, and Barstow said, okay, well, I'm leaving town, and they swore Coles Bashford in. So, I just want to say, remember this thing about history rhymes? Are you ready for the rhyme? Okay, it's not repeating the rhyme. Okay, Baruch Schleisinger and William A. Barstow were Democrats. They weren't Republicans. So this is just like a flip thing from whatever you might be thinking. And I appreciate the fact this is a sensitive subject, but this is what happened, folks. This is what happened. Also what happened, there was a gap between the two governors of about 2 weeks. The lieutenant governor became acting governor. He's a name with Wisconsin history. Arthur MacArthur Sr. His son, Arthur MacArthur Jr., became a general in the Civil War and won the Medal of Honor. Arthur MacArthur, who was only governor for 2 or 3 weeks, his grandson was who? Anybody want to tell me? Douglas MacArthur. His grandson was Douglas MacArthur, who also won the Congressional Medal of Honor. They are one of only 2 fathers and sons to have been awarded the Medal of Honor. So in any case, we can move on from here, and there's Barstow. There's Coles Bashford. Now, Baruch has now been reelected again to the state senate. And Coles Bashford, there's no question that he won. Before I get to this, let me just stop for a minute and repeat something that happened in Schleisinger. I want to go back. You don't keep the slide there. I'll be really fast. But one of the things that Baruch did, for which he's best known, was he was able to get the railroad to build a station in Schleisinger. It was a big deal. Well, let me tell you how big a deal it was. You've all been to Cedar Creek, right? Lovely spot, especially to go for dinner or lunch. But it's not exactly a booming metropolis. There's another little place called Mayfield, which is just a little bit west and north of Jackson. The founder of that wanted to get the railroad to stop in Mayfield. Mayfield is even smaller than Cedar Creek. Baruch got the train station in Schleisinger. When that happened, they had a train full, had railroad executives and other dignitaries come out to Schleisinger for the first stop. Baruch threw this huge party, and it was the biggest party they'd had in Schleisinger. I'm not saying everybody got drunk. I'm not saying that at all. But the truth is, this is the truth, everybody at that party who was supposed to go back to Milwaukee, they were having such a good time, they missed the train going back to Milwaukee. And so they telegraphed to Milwaukee, and a special train came out to pick up the revelers. So Baruch always had an interest in railroads. Railroads were an important thing back then. Coles Bashford was asked to run. He was elected that one time. He was asked to run again. He said, no, I'm really not interested. And he, as soon as his term was up, he left town. Within 2 or 3 weeks, an enormous scandal broke. Okay, this was the biggest scandal that Baruch was involved with. And I want to say this is a man who seems to have had controversy follow him around a lot. All right. Why don't you go back to Baruch, because I think you've seen Coles Bashford. There we are. All right. This is the story of what happened in this case. Now, Byron Kilbourne, a famous name in Wisconsin. He was one of the founders of Milwaukee. He was one of the founders of West Bend. He was originally a surveyor. He got the idea in about 1840 to build canals across Wisconsin. He had a route and everything, but railroads put that dream to rest. So he came up with an idea of having a railroad basically follow the line that he had drawn up for canals from Milwaukee to the Mississippi. In order to get an official charter from the state of Wisconsin, you could say he lobbied the state legislature and the governor, but he didn't lobby them. The truth is, he passed out about $400,000 in railroad bonds. Okay? And the overwhelming majority of the state legislature had their hands out. Okay? The governor got the biggest bribe of all. He got about $40,000 in railroad bonds, and he cashed them in right away. This story broke, and it was an enormous story. It was an enormous story, and it was a disgrace for everybody involved at that time. So Bashford left. He said, well, you're not going to have Bashford to kick around anymore. What did he do? He went out to Arizona, and he became an important official in the territorial government out there. I don't know if Baruch ran for re-election again after the scandal broke. If he did, he was defeated, and he did not run for office again until about 1872. Okay. What did he do in the meantime? Okay. Wait, stop right there. One of the interesting things in the same book, The History of Washington and Ozaukee County, they talk about that Baruch Schleisinger Weil in 1847 built a charming, what they say at that time was a charming house, a villa, they said, on the banks of Big Cedar, on the west bank of Big Cedar. And many people said then that it was just it was actually the first home like that built on Big Cedar. It wasn't his primary residence, although he lived there a lot. We don't know for sure that it looked like this. But we do know that this drawing was found in the Weil cottage probably about 20, 30 years ago. Mike, do you know? Yeah. And it has, it's part of a three-part circle, the top and the bottom. This is in the middle. It's a poem about a guy who's romancing a young woman named Jenny at Cedar Lake. And Baruch's daughter was named Jenny. So this might be what the first house on Big Cedar Lake looked like. We don't know for a fact, but it's all we've got to go on. Okay. So after he leaves Madison, he moves to West Bend. He moves to this house, and he starts running his businesses and stuff here. He'd had a major financial reversal, too, not just because of this railroad scandal. Like I said, he was a real estate speculator. There was a lot of them going on. It was kind of like the it was a lot like the dot-com bubble. And what happened was that there was one of the worst depressions in American history. It's called the Panic of 1857. And the newspapers, because I've gone through the files at the Historical Society, the microfiche, it's full of ads from people suing other people because they want to get the money back from the property that they loaned to them to buy other property. And I found things where it would say Baruch Schleisinger and his partner B being sued by partners C and D. And then in the next month or even the next page or two, it'll be Baruch and C and D or D suing A and B. You know, that's how crazy it got. I mean, they were all doing partnerships together, and they all went down together. But eventually, he did come back. He moved to West Bend. Now, this house is still there. This is it's on 8th Street, just north of 33. It no longer looks like this. It has been remodeled into a duplex, but this is where they lived. He also had a brother and sister-in-law who lived with them. We don't know anything about them, but he had family who came from Alsace as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, well, here he is. He's getting to be an older man now. He's got reelected to the state legislature about 1872. He never got back to the Senate, but he was elected to the Assembly over and over again. And the last time he ran, though, he made a change in his name, not the wheel part. He changed his name on the ballot from Baruch, which is a Hebrew word meaning blessed. He changed it from Baruch to Bernard. Okay. But he was elected in 1880, which means at the end of his term, he was 80 years old. And when he was elected, what we know from reading the newspapers back then is that he was welcomed back to the chamber after that election. He was considered the grand old man of the state assembly, or maybe the state legislature. And they gave him the opportunity to go out and choose whatever desk on the floor to be his desk at the state legislature. So, but you know, so now it's 1880, 1885. He's into his mid-80s, and we don't know about his last 5-7 years or so. He died in 1893, but we assume he died when he was visiting his son and his son's family in Chicago, which included my grandmother, who was about 2 at that time. So let's see the next slide. Okay, let's move along. Okay, so now we're getting down to the next generation, and we'll get through this pretty quickly. Remember I told you about that baby who was who didn't come to the United States, Eugene Weil? This is Baruch's wife's first child. This is Eugene S. Weil. And Eugene Weil was involved with real estate stuff here. And he was also a salesman, and his wife, he joined his wife's husband's business in mittens and gloves in Chicago. Can move along here. He married Carrie Stix Weil. Carrie Stix comes from a prominent Jewish family in St. Louis. Can move along here. Now, Baruch dies in 1893. This is his wife. She's a widow in this photo. She lived until 1910. She always signed her name Mrs. B.S. Weil. Now, funny now, maybe it was funny then. You know, our time is finite here, and I've skipped over one of the major scandals. So we don't need to change anything, but before they even got to Wisconsin, before they maybe even got to New Orleans, Baruch stopped in Baltimore. And in Baltimore, there was a brand new newspaper that was published there called the Police Gazette. And the Police Gazette was primarily published to be sold to barbershops around the country, and it had racy stories and racy drawings of young women. So something for guys at the barbershop to pick up and read and chat with their barber about. They talked about somebody who sounded just like Baruch, about him being stopped, about him being arrested, things like this, and how he left. This was sort of forgotten, but in 1855, someone wrote a letter to the Milwaukee Sentinel saying, I've just learned about this story, and here's your person, Baruch Schleisinger Weil, and he's a scoundrel. So what Baruch did, without getting into it and reading the whole thing, he responded with a long, long letter to the paper, which they published in full. They published it in full. And from this, we know most of what we know about his life, certainly all we know about his life before he came to the United States, is from this letter, in which he says, yes, I was married before, but I was divorced when I came to the States. She said some unkind things about his ex-wife. He said there are charges that I ran out of my debts. He said that's not true at all. He said, and he had a letter from some lawyer who said, yes, I have money to take care of Mr. Weil's debts. And he went through it point by point by point. And one of the charges was that he had changed his last name to keep people from finding him. And he says, no, that is not true. He said, I added the name Weil to my name because it's a compliment that's often paid by Frenchmen to their wives. Now, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of anybody doing that. And I want to say I'm particularly glad that I didn't have to do that, because then my name would be, by the way, my lovely wife Jan over here, my name would then be Steve Simon Lutenberger Geiselink. And let me tell you something, I can't spell that. Okay. So, okay, now to get back, this is, Baruch built a house, that beautiful house, or the house that may have been the drawing of. It burned down about 1880. And about 12 years later, one of his daughters, Jenny, the same Jenny, built this cottage on Big Cedar. And this stood there until 1990s, when it finally got so run down, they took it down. And we have three branches of the family, by the way, as it's evolved. There's the Weils. We've got three summer homes on a piece of property. The Weil house is the one in the middle. The one a little bit to the south is the Mann house. And some of you have been on the tour of homes, and the Mann house was open to it, and we'll get to that in a minute. And my grandparents built the Simon house. My grandmother was one of the Weils, and she built our house in the late 1930s. But this is the original Weil house, not Baruch's, but this one was built about 1891, 1892, and it was a kit that was purchased from Montgomery Ward to be assembled on the site. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is Aunt Teeny. Aunt Teeny, when my dad was young, it was one of Baruch's daughters. She was born July 7th, 1854. And she was a young widow, and she took money that she got from life insurance, and she built a small summer hotel on Big Cedar. And that's still the building being used by the Mann family. So next slide, please. This is her older brother, Eugene S. Weil. We saw a slide of him earlier. He was my great-grandfather. Chip and Jeff and I have different great-grandfathers, but Baruch is our common great-great-grandfather. Now, he was also a salesman, and after Baruch died, the children took over the remaining real estate, and they built a hotel on Big Cedar in conjunction with a railroad from Chicago. Next slide, please. This is Adolph Weil, Eugene's younger brother. Adolph managed that hotel. The photo, the little girl in his lap, is Eleanor Weil Mann, Chip's grandmother. Okay. Okay. This is the hotel they built. I'm showing you this, and I'm showing you a few more what were originally postcards. Right now, I want to thank Karen Gale, who has put together a fantastic collection of turn-of-the-century postcards of all the little resorts that used to circle around Big Cedar Lake. And I want to thank her husband, Rick Gale, as well. So this is just got, yeah, there you go. Just a few of these I'm showing you. So this was the Wheels and the railroad managed it for about probably just a few years. And then it got sold to another family. Can you, Doc, can you give me a guess? Who bought, what family bought the Cedar Lake Park Hotel?
John Rosenheimer.
Yes, this became Rosenheimer's.
My great uncle.
Doc's great uncle. Okay, next slide, please. And this is just a little newspaper article for healthfulness, comfort. No better place than Cedar Lake Park can be found. Proprietor Adolph S. Weil, Schleisingerville or Schleisingerville. Okay, next slide, please. This is another one of Karen's. This shows what the little hotel that Antini built. That's the building on the left. And on the right is the Weil Cottage. Now, when we saw it before, it had a pretty fancy porch around it. That was added later. But there is the original Weil Cottage. Now, that's true, too. There's no 144 in front of it. So, now, another thing that happened, I just want to briefly touch on the yacht club. Eugene S. Weil, who I showed you before, he was a charter member of the yacht club, and he became the second Commodore at the yacht club. Fifth? I thought it was second. Well, wait a minute. I defer to Chip on this because you sent me the dates, and I thought that I always heard that he was the second, but you know.
I think it was the fifth because I think the yacht club was founded in
99.
99. He wasn't Commodore till 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So I think it was fifth.
Let's take Chip's word on this. It's good enough for me because that's another Commodore knowing about Commodores. So the family became involved with sailing on Big Cedar. This is a photo that's my Uncle Bud skipping and Chip's Uncle Jim riding the boards there. Next photo, please. Okay. This is, I think this is right after World War II. We got involved with seaboats and stuff. And for many years, the name Teeny, because the first sailboat that they got, they named it Teeny after Antini. And they kept that for each successive boat for about 30 years. So they're wearing sailing uniforms that they got that had the name on it and the name of the boat. Why did they do this? They did this because John Mann, that's Jim on the left, Bud in the middle, Bud Simon in the middle, and John Mann on the right. John Mann's father-in-law owned the men's clothing store in Shorewood. One day they're going by there, and he's got one of these uniforms up with a name on it, and it says Teeny, C-L-Y-C. They said to him, "Hey, Mel, you have a choice. Give us some uniforms or else." So he said, "Of course you can have the uniforms. Just tell them where they bought them." So here they are, really back from the war, married, no kids yet, and living life. Let's go on here. Okay, there's Baruch again, and so I think we're running out of time here. I think, and I don't want to keep you from your dinner, but why don't we just move forward? Okay, here's another one of Karen's cards. Isn't that great? And look at that. There you can see Rosenheimer's. It's sort of hard to see. It says Steins, because that was Aunt Teeny's last name. And thank you again, Karen. Okay. Now I just included this one because look at that. There you can see the base of the yacht club, what became the base of the yacht club. And by the way, some people say Baruch was involved with distilling, and perhaps I think he was an owner of that building at one point. And there's Rosenheimer's Cedar Lake Park Hotel, whatever. Oh, it said it was still the Cedar Lake Park Hotel. Next slide, please. And there's the old yacht club, probably about 1915, based on the car. Next slide, please. Okay, now this one I included. It's not that different, but this one's special to me. The other one, that was Jim Mann riding the boards. That's Jim Mann skipping. Riding the boards is my dad. He's about 17 years old. Yeah. And this is Teeny the Three. And I want to say that they were involved with sailing, stopped during World War II. All the men went off to war, and one of the women. And, we'll save that for another time. Okay, now where's Bill Sprinkman? Where's Bill Sprinkman? Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, who is that?
I'm not sure I was born at the time.
Well, Bill, you said that was your favorite uncle.
Oh.
That's Al Weil.
He's not my uncle, though, but Al
Well, in effect.
the most wonderful guy
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy in the world, a fun guy. He was every kid's. He'd take you fishing. He was a great guy. He was not happy in the Army, though. He was drafted when World War II came along. He was about 38, and he got drafted. They sent him out to Arizona for desert training. They made him a sergeant because of his age, until they found out on maneuvers in the desert he had filled his canteen. Instead of with water, he filled it with beer. So they busted him. This is true. They busted him down to private, and then he had a birthday the next month, and they sent him home because his 3 months of service was over. Okay. And he was Eugene S. Weil's nephew. Okay? And Al, years later, about 10 years after this, also becomes Commodore. So first Eugene becomes Commodore, then his nephew Alvin becomes Commodore. Next slide, please. All right, isn't this a great photo? Okay, all the way on the right, that is John Mann, Chip's dad. I just put this in here because I said, what a great photo, you know? And I want to say this is during World War II, and I think John looks pretty happy in that. And the reason he's pretty happy is because his wife, who was a WAC, was in the Women's Army Corps. She was managing a military air base in Casablanca, and Johnny had just been able to spend a little time with his wife. Okay, next slide, please. Now this is my grandparents. That's Celeste Weil Simon and my grandfather Will Simon. Just wanted to put it up there because they're my grandparents. Next slide, please. All right, now I'm not going to get into all the stuff that the family did, but you know, in 1976, it was the bicentennial celebration. I think many of you remember that. And one of our cousins came up with the idea, just a few of us are getting together over burgers and beers. He said, you know, we've been here a long time too. Maybe we should have our own party. Not instead of, but so we came up with this idea, and this is the first time. We'd had plenty of parties for birthdays and other things. This is the first time we just had to decide to have a party, and we called it the Bicentennial. And we had it on July 3rd. And I have no idea who those people in that photo are. But okay. And I cut this off a bit, but we had a BS Wheel look-alike contest. The guy covered with cotton and everything, like a beard and everything, that's one of our cousins. He won. He was 12. He was the youngest contestant. He won. One more photo, please. Okay, and this is a poignant one sweet and a poignant one for me, because sitting, I'm not sure who that is standing behind there, but the two older women sitting down there, that is my grandmother Celeste, and she was about to turn 86. And then on the other side of her, to her right, is her older sister, Aunt Peg, who was whatever the math would. She was born 6 years before. So you be quiet. Okay. Time's up. Okay, so let's just move along here. Now, this is the man house. This is a photo of the man house. They've got a series of family reunion photos just to show how it grew. But I want you to notice that tree, the double tree on the right, okay? See, right over there? Right there? Those skinny young trees? And, okay, and that's Aunt Teeny. There she's got gray hair. And there's Eugene Weil with his mustaches. And then there's a guy, looks like he's about 18 or 20, a woman. And then there's a younger guy. That is also Eugene S. Weil. Okay? He was the third person to have that name. Next slide, please. Here's one. That one was about 1905. This is about 10, 15 years later. You can see the family has grown. So has the tree a bit. Next slide, please. Okay, this one we jump ahead. What is this, Chip? Well, let's see. There's Maggie and Katie. So that's about 34 years ago, that photo.
1986, 87.
Well, Maggie's there and she was born in 87. So probably 88 is pretty accurate. And you can see the tree's gotten even bigger, and so has the family. One more, please. And now, this is actually not the most recent one, but this is the one I could get a good photo of. But this is how the family has grown. This one was not in front of the Mann House. This one was at the Joanne Mann Lodge at Camp Silverbrook over here. And right there, please, right there, that is what her grandchildren called, the woman grandchildren called JoJo. That is Joanne Mann, who have been, some accomplished people in the family, but Jo stands in a class by herself. She, was when she and John got married during the war. One story is that she outranked him when they got married. If she didn't outrank him then, she did outrank him like a few months later. But she became, after spending a career in education, she became the head of the Milwaukee area Girl Scouts and ended up serving on the Girl Scouts of America Board of Directors. And yeah. And so that was taken at this lodge, taken at the Girl Scout Camp Lodge out there, which is named for her. And I don't want to go too much longer. I know you want to eat. Let's just go through the rest of these slides. Move along. That's another story for another time. This is the wheelhouse now. As I told you, it got torn down in the early 1990s. You can't see the whole thing, but it's a different style. But nevertheless, that's what it looks like now. This is the Mann House, as it looks almost exactly the same, but you can see those trees have gotten a lot bigger. They're over 100 years old now. One more, and this is the Simon House, and we have a common big backyard. So, okay, I want to, next slide, please. Oh, that's my dad's E-boat painting, still hangs over our mantle at the Simon House. Okay, and that's the memorial garden we have. So I'd like to go one more after that. These are all cousins, the Morgenthals. Unfortunately, none of them are with us anymore, but I just wanted to include them because I wanted to. Okay, this is Aunt Teeny, and I'm going to get to a point, because I've wondered what kind of person was Baruch like, okay? Well, my dad told me, it's not too evident in this photo. I said, but he said Aunt Teeny had a twinkle in her eye. And her niece, Eleanor, Chip's grandmother, Dad said also had a twinkle in her eye. Now, I never knew Eugene Weil because he passed away when, 1910 or so. But look at the next photo of him. You can see the twinkle in his eye too. And so when I want to ask you something, you've got Eleanor, you've got Teeny, you've got Eugene S. Weil. Don't you think if you met Baruch, he'd have a twinkle in his eye too? Yeah. Okay. I just, before going, first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here and for being so nice. I want to, could you go forward to I think it's the next slide? Okay. sitting over here, the guy in this photo, we call him Cousin Mike. And this photo is the inside of the Weil Cottage now, Weil Summer Home. But his name isn't really Mike. It's just a nickname that they used to have a different first name. That is also Eugene S. Weil. He is the patriarch of our family, and I'd like you to stand up, Mike, and just say hi. And so thank you all very much. And Linda did not ask me to say this, but don't forget to open your wallets before you leave. Thank you very much.